Well, South Africa's a bit different. We're the baby in this consortium. We're 50 million people, and there are times when I feel very conscious of how much smaller a society we have to deal with than the two giants represented on my right and left here. And it does have an impact, I think, in terms of both the scale of vision and the complexity of the issues, although South Africa is a very complex place all on its own, with its 50 million people. At the moment, Brazil is in South Africans' imagination, or certain South Africans. Our government thinks that there are lots of models they might be able to follow from Brazil. Nothing specific has been done as yet. On the other hand, our trade union movement is talking a lot about what they're calling the Lula moment. It's not quite clear if they know exactly what this moment means, and I wish they'd been here yesterday afternoon to hear the discussion about no workers and weakened trade unions. So Brazil is kind of prominent in South Africa's imagination, and we in a sense have been trying to inform ourselves and others about the realities of this, which I wish were simpler. Well, it's harder to go home with, actually we're not quite sure exactly what caused the good things that are happening in Brazil, other than try and do a whole lot of things at once. What I thought I'd do today is try and give you some sort of context for South Africa and, in a sense, background for the questions and issues I imagine will come out of the discussion. So let me rather quickly do that and then raise a few issues that have come out of our discussions yesterday. Let me start with South Africa has now been a democracy for 18 years, and perhaps this is when your adolescence is over and some of the difficult issues start to emerge, but we are a country that is experiencing a very challenging period in a number of dimensions, which I will go into. We're like Brazil in many ways that are often extremely surprising, in that we are a society that has had insiders and outsiders and is characterized by that more and more. And that 18 years of democracy, which might surprise people, has in some respects deepened that divide rather than undermining it, not in all respects. But we have a population, a lot of whom are very poor and cut out of a great deal of the benefits of the economy and of many other aspects of our society. What kind of democracy are we? Well, we're not bad. We've had 4 general elections since we became a democracy. We've had 4 local government elections at separate times, and they're certainly free and fair, and pretty well run, not just for a developing country, but for any country. We have independent institutions, a judiciary, the freest press in Africa, and we have a strong civil society. It went underground for a while after we became a democracy, but it is re-emerging and encouraging new and vibrant forms, and that's very healthy. However, we are run by the ANC ruling group, who have been in power for the last 18 years, and this coalition of interests is now starting to fragment. They have a strong hold on political power. There is no prospect of this being changed, certainly in the next election. But they are a ruling group that are in many respects in transition, and I would argue in trouble. We're also a country where, because of our history, very many people vote their race rather than their interests, which is problematic to move towards a more competitive kind of political system. And I think one of the worrying things is that we now have loud voices within our ruling group I'm not sure how much support they have, but they're certainly very loud, who are attacking aspects of our constitutional settlement. So nothing has changed. The Constitution remains firm, our judiciary remains firm, but there are worrying noises taking place within the ruling group. And then corruption, there was a period for, I'd say, the first 12, 14 years of democracy where one could argue with credibility that corruption was as good or as bad as it was under the apartheid regime, but because we were a freer society, we were now hearing more about it. But I think you can't argue that anymore, and that unfortunately corruption is now present at the very heart of the ruling group and the ruling family. What about development issues? We are Africa's biggest and strongest economy. We have a financial sector that is exceptional in the developing world and has recently been rated by the World Economic Forum as the second in the world, number 2 in the world for its stability, and it is a very sophisticated sector that I think is enormous asset for the country, although last week I hosted a debate with a leading bank and senior government people, and there are some people in government who want to discuss whether having a large and sophisticated financial sector with all that it brings to the country is a good thing or not. This is one example of some of the discordant noises we're hearing in our society that is worrying. We have also notched up some important achievements since we became a democracy. Millions more people have water, they have access to electricity, they have housing that's state subsidized, and we have a fantastic record in terms of access to schooling. So there are areas of improvement and achievement that should not be ignored. However, on that foundation, there is no doubt that South Africa in development terms is struggling today to get the kind of growth rate the country desperately needs in order to bring the outsiders into the modern economy. Thanks to the global financial crisis, our most successful economic period, where we were hitting some 5% for 3 years, was brought to a halt, and we are now really struggling to get back to decent growth rates. It's unlikely we will get over 2.6% this year. Perhaps more important for the longer term is that there is uncertainty within the cabinet itself as to, well, let me put this differently. There are different schools of thought within our cabinet as to which way to grow South Africa's economy. The net result is that it's kind of paralyzed, and if there is any movement, it is in the wrong direction rather than the right one more often than not. South Africa did not, unlike Brazil, take advantage of the commodities boom. We managed to shoot ourselves in the foot and to miss an unprecedented opportunity for a country that has so many of the minerals that China desperately needs, and other countries as well. We have a new opportunity, which I hope we don't miss, which I think is a great opportunity, which is there is, somebody told us that the Brazilian oil find is a bit like saying there's $1 billion check for you on the moon. You just have to work out how to get there. Our opportunity is, I think, better than that, but still tentative. It looks like we've discovered potential for a new source of energy for the country, which would be enormous. It would involve fracking, and as you can imagine, there are some groups sort of shouting very loudly about this. The government has, however, given a green light now to go to the next stage of exploration, but this could frankly be profound for the future of South Africa.
Shale gas, for those who are not familiar with the subject.
Shale gas, yes. It's the opportunity for a massive find of shale gas, which could be very important. I hope the country can take advantage of this if it's real. Let me just say a few words more about development issues. I think for those of you who know a little bit about South Africa, we are an urbanizing country, but not as rapidly as Brazil by any means, which, as I understand it, is well over 85% urbanized. We're better. I think it's a good thing. We're better than India in this regard, but we're certainly not managing this process to take maximum advantage of it. Our local government system is struggling, and most local authorities are pretty dysfunctional, which is problematic. And I think as a society we have failed to deal with the legacy of the homelands. We thought that these areas where black South Africans were pushed into, and in the apartheid era, that somehow they would just kind of modernize. And it's a much more complicated than that, but we haven't come to grips with exactly what the role of rural South Africa is in our economic vision, or what is best for the people who live in the rural areas, and how to modernize land and other issues which I know are important questions for India and Brazil. We're struggling with a land reform program which has not been a success and has harmed our agricultural development, although we're not really an agricultural country. We're a water short territory in much of our land area, but they're important areas where we could be doing much better than we are. We're struggling with a massive unemployment challenge, where over 50% of young people, whichever way you want to define young, are unemployed, and where the overall unemployment rate, again depending on definition, I would argue is 30% and over. And then, although we've been very successful with access to schooling, we are struggling to deal with quality of schooling, and there are some people who run around the country saying things are worse than they were under apartheid South Africa. I've yet to see any of them prove that, but they're certainly not significantly better for the vast majority of black South Africans, and that's really important. Now let me sort of make some concluding remarks then. The first is about our growing middle class. South Africa has a growing middle class, not of the scale of the Brazilian debate or middle sector, whatever you want to call it, but very importantly for our society, this is the vast amount of growth is coming from black South Africans. It's ironic that the African National Congress, that in a sense wanted to liberate all South Africans, gets the vast majority of its vote from the poorest people in South Africa, has actually put enormous amounts of energy into growing a middle class in our country, an important endeavor, but the way in which it's been done has some added to the country's challenges in terms of dependency on the state, corruption, and a failure to build the entrepreneurial sector of our economy, and rather the deal-making sector of our economy. I think that is being realized in more and more circles, and a change might start to happen, but that has been a negative consequence of this. There are consequences from the loudest voices in our society being urban middle-class black South Africans who are increasingly organized, and one of the big questions for the future of our society is going to be how this plays out. Do we start to build a more independent middle class based in the market and how the market plays out, and to have an interest in economic growth in the society and higher economic growth? Or are there so many fat takings to be made in South Africa from, if you like, special relationships with the state and getting tenders and patronage from the state, and also, if you kind of mau-mauing the flag catchers, if you remember the book, sort of guilting the white business and so-called white business and large companies that there's a lot to be taken from those companies as well. So I think there's a real sort of challenge in terms of how much can be bled out of the system before the interests start to coalesce and we actually have to get higher growth for both the middle class and others to prosper. Politically, what the middle class does, I think white and black, is going to be very important. We are at a very challenging time in terms of how the country moves forward. There are local level protests in many places, small towns and other places that pop up and then die down in a bizarre way. It seems that many people go and vote for the ANC at a local level, and the next week they'll go out and protest against the same people they voted for, which is a puzzling phenomenon, but this is starting to change, and there are more people around the country starting to question this. This is the last time I'm going to vote for these people. But how that actually plays out remains to be seen. There's a phenomenon of, whatever you want to call it, the term in South Africa that's become popular is social distance, and I think the recent mining tragedy, the exact facts of which are not yet known, at Marikana, where the police ended up shooting a large number of people, but some of the protesters had also killed people before that and afterwards. One of the key insights that was, or realities of South Africa revealed by this incident was the social distance, as it's been called, between union leaders and their own members, where union leaders and apparatchiks are getting paid a very middle-class salary, and workers were saying, we're getting paid a lot less, and we're not happy about that. We don't even like you. Spend too much time with the bosses, and we're going to either just go out and negotiate on our own outside the labor bargaining system, or we're going to create a new union. So a time of real turbulence in industrial relations, which requires strong leadership, both from companies and from the society and the state, which has not been overwhelming in its evidence up till now. So a real sort of new dynamic in South Africa. The bottom line of all of this is that the country does not have real leadership at the moment, and it certainly doesn't have a vision, a project for our future that everyone is buying into in very broad terms. One of the striking things about Brazil is how for at least 5 presidential terms now, or into the 5th one, there's been a kind of broad agreement on where you're going. Some disagreement on this and that, but a broad agreement. South Africa is not in that position. And I suppose so we really do need strong leadership and vision of a democratic kind, hopefully not another kind, because the soft authoritarian option is kind of looming, I'm afraid, where people who don't know how to govern a complex society resort to force. And I think that's become a possible option. But really, the way out for South Africa has to be some kind of, if you like, let's put this in traditional terms, a best man cabinet. Best man and woman cabinet where we have very talented, experienced people who, irrespective of race or where they sit in the society, could be mobilized to help lead this country to become the fantastic success it could be. And then the last part of that is South Africa has a big opportunity in terms of the growth taking place in over 17 African countries that have now been growing at really impressive rates for the last decade. This is a very big opportunity for South Africa. It's been taken, but there's a lot more that we could be doing, and that could be one of the visionary elements of how we capitalize on the strengths that we have to go forward. So let me end there. a difficult country to talk about at the moment, and a difficult country that's going through testing times, but that has enormous strengths that are very unusual for a developing country democracy.